Mr. President.
The Democratic
Are we
leader.
on a quorum?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, the American people are crying out for major, significant changes in policing in this country. Being killed by the police is now the 6th leading cause of death for young men in America, and young black men are 2.5 times more likely than white men to be killed by police, while black women are 1.4 more likely than white women to be killed by police. As hundreds of thousands of Americans of all ages and colors take to the streets to demand change, we need legislation that rises to the moment. So Democrats introduced a bill 3 weeks ago that would bring strong, comprehensive, and lasting change to police departments across America, the Justice and Policing Act. Our colleagues in the House are expected to pass that bill this week. However, here in the Senate, our Republican colleagues have responded to our comprehensive proposal with an approach that is piecemeal and half-hearted. And the longer you look at the Republican policing reform effort, the more obvious the shortcomings and deficiencies. The Republican bill does nothing to reform the legal standards that shield police from accountability for violating Americans' constitutional rights. The Republican bill does nothing to encourage independent investigations of police departments with patterns and practices that violate the Constitution. The Republican bill does nothing to reform the use of force standard, nothing on qualified immunity, nothing on racial profiling, and nothing on limiting the transfer of military equipment to police departments. The Republican bill doesn't even truly ban chokeholds or no-knock warrants. It leaves major loopholes when it comes to chokeholds and only requires more data on no-knock warrants. More data would not have saved Breonna Taylor's life. Allowing police to use chokeholds whenever they say that deadly force is necessary is not going to save lives. We need a bill that achieves genuine police reform. The Republican proposal comes across like a list of suggestions. I would repeat this important warning. If we pass a bill that's ineffective, and the killings continue, and police departments resist change, and there's no accountability, the wound in our society will not close, it will fester. This is not about making an effort or dipping our toes in the water. It must be about solving a problem that is taking the lives of too many Black Americans. This is not a time for studies or commissions or tinkering around the edges. This is not a debate about tax policy or transportation policy. It is a matter of the constitutional rights of the American people, and it is truly a matter of life and death. And unfortunately, Senator Scott's bill is deeply and fundamentally flawed. It would not have prevented the death of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery or Michael Brown or Eric Gardner. And if it won't stop future deaths of Black Americans in police custody, then it does not represent the change that is demanded right now. On COVID, over the past several weeks, there's been an alarming increase in the number of COVID-19 cases in a number of American states. Florida, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina continue to report thousands of new cases each day. State officials in Texas and Arizona are warning about the dire number of hospitalizations. Anyone looking at the facts would conclude that we need to figure out what's causing these increases and put measures in place to limit this new spread of the disease. But President Trump does not look at the facts or try to understand them. Instead, the president is so consumed with his own ego, his own political interests and perception of how he's handled this crisis, that he's actually downplaying the numbers and inventing ridiculous excuses for why COVID-19 cases continue to increase. At his inadvisable and very poorly attended rally in Tulsa on Saturday, President Trump said that he told his administration to, quote, slow the testing down, please, unquote, so the number of COVID cases won't look so bad for him. Amazing. He said that. don't learn the truth about a serious and deadly disease so he might look better? He went on to say that testing was a double-edged sword. Let me break the president's statement down for a moment. By calling testing a double-edged sword, the president means that on one hand, testing could be good because you know who tells you who has COVID-19. But on the other hand, testing might not be so good because the more cases makes the president look bad. Who thinks like that in the time of a raging pandemic? White House officials tried to claim the president was joking, but today the vice president denied that they were just in jest, calling them, quote, a passing observation, whatever that means. Regardless of whether he was serious or not, the president's comments are factually inaccurate. The increase in testing is not responsible for the increase in the number of cases. In fact, the rate of positive cases is going up in many states, which means community spread. There is a lie sitting at the heart of all of this. President Trump wants Americans to believe that the number of cases is going up because his administration has done such a great job on testing. The truth is, the administration can't even get around to spending the money Congress has provided for improving testing and tracing. Senator Murray and I sent a letter to HHS Secretary Azar last week asking him why the administration hasn't dispersed the $14 billion we gave it to ramp up testing and tracing capability. $14 billion is just sitting there, waiting for the Trump administration to use to help our country. Senator Murray and I are looking for answers. Why isn't the money distributed when it's desperately needed? What the heck is going on? It's hard to imagine a more haphazard, less focused, less consistent response from an administration during a national crisis. Whether it's calling COVID a hoax, or prescribing bleach, or his ego-driven rally over the weekend, the president keeps reminding us he doesn't take the COVID pandemic seriously enough. Ironically, the best thing about the president's rally was that so few people attended. Otherwise, the risks of spreading COVID would have been significantly higher. On another matter, there are so many matters, there's so much trouble this administration is in, it's hard to count, and you'll probably need several hours to document and talk about them all. Well, last Friday night, Attorney General Barr claimed that Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, was, quote, stepping down. A short time later, Mr. Berman revealed that the Attorney General was lying and that he was not, in fact, stepping down. Over the past 2 days, this sordid, ham-handed plot by President Trump and Attorney General Barr to oust a well-respected U.S. attorney played out in public view. But for Mr. Berman's principled stand, the White House and the DOJ would have subverted the chain of succession at the Southern District of New York to install a pliant U.S. attorney from New Jersey in Mr. Berman's place. Thankfully, due to Mr. Berman's courage, that plan was thwarted, and Mr. Berman's deputy will take over the leadership of the Southern District and continue its important work. She has a fine reputation as a prosecutor and someone of integrity. People of integrity don't seem to be welcome in this administration. Then the DOJ announced that the president intended to nominate the sitting SEC chairman, Jay Clayton, to replace Mr. Berman. As the senator from New York, I will not return a blue slip on Mr. Clayton's nomination. But regardless, Jay Clayton should withdraw his name from consideration and refuse to be an accomplice to this scheme. There appears to be no legitimate motive to fire Mr. Berman, which leaves the obvious question. Were President Trump and Attorney General trying to remove him for a corrupt motive? Was it because Mr. Berman and the Southern District of New York were pursuing criminal investigations into President Trump and his associates? The president certainly has a pattern of firing government watchdogs who are investigating his misconduct or that of his associates. We need an immediate, top-to-bottom investigation into what transpired with the plot to dismiss Mr. Berman. So I've demanded that the Office of Professional Responsibility at the Department of Justice work with the Justice Department's Inspector General to determine whether there were corrupt motives for Mr. Berman's dismissal, and if so, discipline the officials involved, no matter who they are or how high up they go. These two offices jointly investigated the firing of U.S. attorneys in 2006 during the Bush administration and should do so again. The Judiciary Committee here in the Senate, led by Chairman Graham, must also investigate what happened here, using its subpoena power if necessary. Senator Graham seems to be investigating President Obama, Vice President Biden, 53 subpoenas. He certainly must have time to investigate a serious problem that has come before us right now. After all, the abject refusal of Senate Republicans to hold President Trump accountable for his assault on the rule of law in the country is what got us here in the first place. Senate Republicans refused to stand up to the president when he fired the FBI director for investigating his campaign. They refused to stand up to the president when he made a national emergency in order to steal funds for the border wall. They refused to stand up to the president when he dismissed not one or two or three, but 4 inspectors general. And they refused to stand up to the president when he tried to bully a foreign power into helping him in his reelection. Every time the president breaks a window, the Senate Republican majority dutifully sweeps up the glass. Every blue moon or so, a Republican senator will issue a mild rebuke of the president's behavior or pen a strongly worded letter. But the response is never commensurate with the offense, and as a result, President Trump knows there's no line he can't cross. He and his attorney general can fire a sitting U.S. attorney without cause, perhaps for investigating criminal wrongdoing by the president or his associates, and Senate Republicans will hardly bat an eye. Will Senate Republican senators ever say enough? Finally today, Leader McConnell will move forward with the nomination of Mr. Corey Wilson to serve as a lifetime appointment on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Mr. Wilson is an avowed opponent of the nation's health care law, calling it illegitimate and perverse. Even worse, Wilson has a lengthy record, of support for policies that suppress voting rights. In the state legislature and the Mississippi Secretary of State's office, he pushed for restrictive voter ID laws, criticized the Voting Rights Act, peddled unproven claims about voter fraud. In 2011, he said that the NAACP's concern about voter suppression in Mississippi were, quote, poppycock. We are in the middle of a national conversation about police reform and systematic racial justice. Leader McConnell talks about it on the floor, and at the same time, he has the temerity to push a judge with demonstrated hostility to voting rights, a man who criticized the greatest advance in civil rights legislation in the past century, for a seat on the circuit court in which people of color make up 55% of the population. The nomination is so appalling in general, and at this particular moment, that several Democrats, myself included, have taken the unusual step of writing Leader McConnell today to request that he withdraw Mr. Wilson's nomination. I believe if there's sincerity about the remarks here about healing the racial wounds, then the withdrawal of Mr. Wilson would occur. Plain and simple. It would be disgraceful for the Senate to approve a nominee who has long trivialized voter disenfranchisement and racial discrimination at the ballot box. Leader McConnell should halt any further work on Mr. Wilson and instead work with the administration and civil rights groups to find a nominee who will actually protect voting rights in the Fifth Circuit. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.